Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to another Tech Happy Hour. Today's guest is Amy Posner, the EV planner for the City of Alexandria. She shares information and data about their plan in transitioning their fleet to electric vehicles. Thank you so much, Amy, for your presentation today. I wanted to let everyone else listening in know that we got about 30 to 45 seconds into the presentation without recording, so you missed just a little bit, but that may be why it's different than usual. But thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, if you want to know more about Virginia Clean Cities, please check our website at vacleancities.org or check in the description for a link to our website and email. Thank you so much and enjoy.
With meet the charging demand in our community now and into the future. And then with our energy and climate change action plans and our environmental action plans have kind of broader goals and targets for how we can achieve our carbon emission reduction and other environmental and energy goals. So within those documents, specifically the environmental action plan, we have a goal that by fiscal year 2040, so June 30th, 2040, 100% of our fleets, including our municipal fleet, our transit fleet with Dash, and our school bus fleet, will all be zero emission. So we do have a handful of electric vehicles in our fleet so far. We've got about a little over 40, so I guess several handfuls, not including our Dash fleet. You see on the upper left, we have 14 battery electric buses in our Dash fleet. I think it's 10 electric school buses, and then about 40 light duty vehicles in our municipal fleet. So we've got some Ford Mach-E's, some Ford Lightnings, Nissan Leafs, some utility vehicles, and you can see our solar beam charger there in the photo as well. So, we already have a bunch of vehicles. So how are we doing to meet our 2040 goal? And the answer is, I don't really know. How do we know? So, to figure out kind of how we're doing with meeting our full fleet transition goals to get to 100% electric fleet by 2040, we decided to move forward with an effort to do a fleet transition plan and study to really figure out what is the most cost-effective, resource-effective way to get to our goal, and how can we get there with our vehicle purchases and our charging infrastructure deployment. I'm sure some of y'all have faced this as well. It can be difficult in municipal governments to do procurements, to install chargers. And so, something we've been struggling with is having vehicles on site before our chargers are ready. And that makes it really difficult for the operations folks to, see the full benefits of switching to electric vehicles if they're having challenges with charging and refueling. So the fleet transition study will really help us with some guardrails to understand what is it going to take to get to our goals? How much is it going to cost? Are we going to need more money over the course of this transition to make it happen? And, what does it look like? How do we phase in our infrastructure so that we are ahead of our vehicle purchases and it's really a seamless as possible transition? So we are working with ICF to conduct our fleet transition study. And this is the general process that they use. These are some of the tasks that we're completing. So first, we kind of do the general procurement timeline with, the timeline of actually purchasing the vehicles. We don't want to retire anything early, and just looking at our retirement schedule, what is it going to take to get to 2040 with our goals? And then we look at the charging infrastructure needs. So we understanding kind of the duty cycles of each of our vehicles, where they're parked, how many miles they go each day, what charging infrastructure do they need, and kind of what does that look like over time. And then we'll get kind of a phased facility design, looking at, over the next couple of years, where do we need chargers? What are those conceptual designs? And then a full report of kind of what are the total costs of ownership with maintenance, operation, capital costs, all of that, doing that comparison to our internal combustion engine fleet. And how do we pay for it? What are some different funding and financing options? And then kind of getting that full 10-year plan. So I have a couple examples of kind of what some of these outputs might look like. And we did a huge data collection effort, working directly with our entire fleet team and our operations folks to get all the data from these kind of disparate sources and systems, getting it into the form that we needed to really fully understand what are the duty cycles we're looking at for our different types of fleet vehicles. And when thinking about charging infrastructure for your fleet, what do you plan for? Do you and kind of vehicle suitability for replacements? Do you plan for, the kind of what a normal daily operation is, or do you plan for what these edge cases, these really heavy duty days for mileage? Sometimes we have vehicles that need to go to Richmond and back in a single day. If we have a snow emergency, we have, our snow plows on the road for 24 hours straight for the duration of the emergency. So which one do you plan for? And, the answer is yes. So you got to plan for both. And so thinking about, Alexandria is a pretty small city. So our vehicles generally don't get a ton of miles on them every day. But, looking at what's kind of the worst case, we want to make sure that, especially for our emergency response vehicles as well, that we are meeting the need kind of across all of the operational scenarios that our folks use these vehicles for. Because we don't want anyone to end up in a situation where they have a vehicle or a charging solution that doesn't allow them to do the job that we need them to do in the city and provide really critical services to the community. So, kind of taking into account kind of the average duty cycle as well as edge cases is really important, and kind of speaking directly to the operational folks, understanding like what the full range of their needs are, how they get their vehicles in and out. All those things are really critical. We're worked with the departments, our fleet department, to kind of make sure we had a full understanding of. And another challenge, which I'm sure comes as no surprise, is what do you do with your emergency response vehicles? There are some options currently for, for pursuit vehicles, for fire apparatus, but the industry is still pretty early on with these different options for vehicles. And the last thing we want is, again, to be in a situation where we've electrified a vehicle and it can't meet an emergency need that we have in the city. These vehicles get a high variable range every day. And so, this is a really important problem. And so, we are kind of, as much as we can, delaying some of the purchases, especially on the fire apparatus, until the industry can mature a little bit more. We can see kind of what other municipalities are doing, and kind of taking a little bit of a slower approach to maybe pilot some new technology. So just something really critical to consider if you're going to do transition planning on yourself. And so looking at kind of the end goal of what a full fleet transition might look like, here just some example of the results that we were provided, like looking at the total cost of ownership savings and carbon reduction savings. So this shows kind of over 29 years. So that takes into account us getting to our goal of 2040, and then kind of at the end of that life cycle of that fully electric fleet. So over the full life of those vehicles, kind of currently estimating about some savings, about 1.7 million, which over 29 years isn't a lot, but a motivation for the city is really, we're not switching to electric vehicles to save money. We're kind of doing this in a way to meet our climate and carbon reduction goals. But it is nice that we're not expected to have to expend a ton more money over the total life cycle cost to do this transition. And we'll just kind of have to see how these maintenance and fuel cost savings actually materialize or not over time. And I'm going to give you just a couple more examples of some of the outputs that we've gotten for our fleet study so far. It's still in process. But this is kind of just what it might look like for what a transition timeline might for different vehicle types. So looking out into 2040, just the different bars are kind of the number of vehicles that that we would, need to replace that are up for replacement by type. And something you might want to consider if you're doing this on your own was watching, I'm sure in normal operations, not every vehicle that's up for replacement gets replaced every year. Some things get delayed for a variety of reasons. And so it was really critical working with our fleet department to make sure that this plan matched what, is feasible for great folks in our department that procure these vehicles. Kind of making sure we can level these out. So we don't have a year where we're purchasing 200 vehicles, kind of making sure that everything is, which is unusual for us, city our size, making sure we kind of have, keeping kind of our annual purchases within kind of what's a normal range. So that was something that was important for us. And then as much as we can, matching the typical budget that the fleet department has every year to replace vehicles. But also understanding if that amount of money is not going to be sufficient to do this, we need to know that through this assessment as well, so that we can inform, council, all the budget decision makers of what might be needed in order to make this happen. And similarly with, our charging infrastructure, this bar chart here that's partially obscured so it tells a similar story. The number of chargers that we would need at each facility. So each different color bar is a different facility. We have a lot of facilities in the city that have fleet vehicles each year based on the replacement schedule. So, this is kind of a good example too of this kind of planning document versus implementation plan. I'm not going to do a procurement every year to install this exact number of chargers for each facility. We're going to do a procurement and get at least, a few years of charging infrastructure that we need for each facility, so that our fleet can kind of grow into it a little bit more easily. But this provides kind of good guardrails of, by this time, by this year, you should have, 20 of these level 2 chargers to service the vehicles that, you're planning to implement, to deploy. So, this is kind of how we're planning to use this data. And then within this analysis, kind of rolling up all those costs for the infrastructure, for the upgrades, and also having the opportunity to look at, at each facility, what does our existing capacity look like? Do we have the ability to just kind of install these with our current capacity? What electrical infrastructure upgrades are going to be needed? And also realizing, because that information is really critical, because some of these utility upgrades might be pretty significant, and working with the utility provider is going to require some serious lead time in some cases to make some of these larger upgrades. We have a lot of city facilities kind of located all in the same block or two of one road. And so electrifying all those fleets is going to be a huge power draw. We've got our transit bus depot, our school bus depot, our police headquarters, and a large fleet facility all within 2 blocks. So with all those electric vehicles, it's going to be a huge power draw going all battery electric. So making sure we're keeping Dominion informed and making sure that they can provide the infrastructure that we need to make this happen. So I really want to drive home as much as I can that how valuable I think doing fleet transition planning is. Again, to give you some of those guardrails to show kind of how well you're doing in meeting your goals and meeting your needs. And this, obviously there's a cost to doing these analyses, but for me, one of the benefits of doing this is based on the duty cycles of the vehicles. ICF ran an analysis of looking at, what are the charging needs if every single vehicle has its own dedicated port, and then based on the duty cycles and, how can we optimize that? And so we aren't overbuilding at specific facilities, but we're still making sure that all of our use cases and needs are met. And if this analysis saves us from installing 5 chargers that we don't need, it pretty much pays for itself. So that was really useful for us to kind of have that value added. And 15 years is a long time, but it's also not. So it really kind of gives us, it brought up a lot of questions with the fleet team, with like the operations folks, of what operational procedures and practices that we might need to change over time. With, I guess, an example of our snow emergency team, we have kind of different areas where we deploy plows for 24 hours a day as long as the emergency lasts. And within each shift, folks have a 1 hour break. And, the way the shifts are set up, that 1 hour break occurs, at the same time for everyone who's on the road. So if we have, every single one of those vehicles coming back and only has an hour to charge, every 8 hours, that's, 1 hour of a huge power spike. So is there maybe an opportunity where we can phase that out, have folks come back at different times to reduce the number of chargers we need, and not have this huge power draw for 1 hour a day and a couple days in a row. So it really gives us the opportunity to think about some of these future operational changes and needs that have been really helpful for us in the fleet team. And really kind of making, and yeah, I guess actually have some of these takeaways on the slide. The data collection piece and the QA/QC of the data was, I think, a bit more labor intensive than maybe we were expecting. Our fleet folks have a ton of systems to keep track of really important data for our assets and fueling records and mileage. And so kind of getting data output from those systems and into kind of the form that was needed for this analysis to make sure that we were representing the fleet in the best possible way was a pretty big undertaking. And we're lucky that we have access to all this data. They were just kind of in disparate systems. So if your fleet maybe doesn't have all of that data on hand, then that planning for some additional support or time to collect that data and QA and QC it might be important for you. And again, making sure that all the operations folks are involved in the early stages of this. Like I mentioned, we scheduled some meetings with the different departments to make sure we had a full understanding of what those edge cases would be, what those, unusual heavy usage days are, to make sure that we have solutions and for vehicles that will work for that and charging solutions. And again, that, what's not necessarily going to be represented in this fleet transition plan that we get is kind of the opportunity to do some, smaller technology pilots and, try different things with the charging strategies. And how we can kind of update our plans and the specific plan, as we kind of learn a little bit more about how aligned everything is with our actual real life operations and abilities to kind of purchase these vehicles and deploy chargers. Do we, do we really need, DC fast chargers in all these situations, or will level 2 chargers, be able to meet the same need at lower cost and lower power draw? So it's, I think, a critical foundation, but really kind of gives us the opportunity to explore a little bit in the earlier stages of our transition, and will inform kind of what any sort of future updates to the plan would look like. So I highly recommend for those operating their own fleets to do this sort of planning. I think it's going to be, super beneficial for us, and kind of be able to provide some real guidance to all the parties involved. And before I wrap up and open it up for questions, I want to, for those that are local to Alexandria, I want to plug our Eco City Festival. It's 2 weeks from Saturday at Ben Brennan Park in Alexandria. So would love to see y'all there. We're going to have an EV ride and drive, EV showcase, e-bike and scooter test rides, and then a ton of other exhibits from local organizations, a moon bounce. What more could you ask for? So yes, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Amy, for that presentation. This next section is a question and answer section we have with the audience that it was in attendance. A lot of good questions are asked here and answered. So if you want to learn more, please listen in. With that, let's get back to the recording. We have a couple questions that came in during the presentation. So starting from the top, Van asked, did you plan on energy storage for critical operation to mirror where you have existing liquid fuel storage?
Yeah, so that's a great question and something that's still, in progress. And I think I saw Daryl Seiler, our fleet manager, on the call too. So we were just having a conversation about this earlier this week. Um, Basically about what our options are and what does that look like. So that is going to be a part of the study, at least to have information about what the options are. Because especially with our police operations, there's a requirement to have 72 hours of backup. And so if we want to explore something that's not a fossil fuel backup solution, what does that actually look like, money, space, kind of equipment wise. So that's definitely still a work in progress.
All right. Next question comes from Emily. I'm curious what charger utilization or ratio of chargers to vehicles you assumed. What data did you use to inform that assumption?
Yeah, so how our contractor ICF approaches this is they start with an assumption that each vehicle has a dedicated charging port. And then, kind of look at the costs and everything for that. And then they use the information of the duty cycles for each vehicle in each location. So how many miles they're completing each day, at what frequency, what are the shifts that vehicle is on, how many hours can we assume that they have available to charge. So they use all of that data to kind of refine and optimize what that final ratio is. And it's different for each facility. Our police department has a much different ratio than our some of our other, like our code administration department. So with this study, they helped us kind of figure out what that optimal ratio was.
Can I follow up on that question? I'm curious, in practice for your fleet, what that ratios look like either for the non-emergency side and then also for the public safety and emergency side.
Yeah, in general, for the vehicles that we have so far, they're all light duty. Generally, they would need to charge once or twice a week. So, they're all charging overnight, but I don't know exactly what the ratio is, but, assuming once or twice a week, they would need to charge overnight.
Yeah, I know in our fleet, the way the fleet manager has been thinking about it is he's like, you should get a group of like 3 or 4 vehicles. You charge Monday, you charge Tuesday, you charge Wednesday. I'm curious to just hear from others if there's been sort of like a different way the fleets have figured out, sort of that charger to vehicle ratio and how to figure out where each person charges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've had similar conversations, but we haven't implemented kind of a schedule yet. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of exactly the same conversations that we're having.
I will say that at Virginia Clean Cities, we do A fleet models, and we, depending on the use case, like we did one for a university, and we accounted for a third of a charger. So similar to what you were saying, Emily, where you have 3 vehicles that are associated with 1 charger. But I'm guessing that use case would heavily dictate how often something needs to charge, and for how long. Do you feel like, was that an okay answer for you, Emily? Do you mind if we move on?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Another question or a question from Steve. It says, any consideration around the microgrids or on-site generation and storage, and or V to G, both in general and for resilience, given the proximity of the energy fleet or emergency fleet, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we're definitely, hey Steve, we're definitely considering what non-fossil fuel options there are for our emergency power needs, but still a little early on that. And as for vehicle to grid, our school bus fleet has an agreement with Dominion Energy. Dominion, I don't know if they're still offering this program, but they provided the chargers for the electric school buses in return to participate in a vehicle to grid program. So I don't so basically those buses would be available assets if that's ever needed. So it's something that we're definitely interested in exploring in our municipal fleet side as well as like, vehicle to building. It's something that we've been considering too with our transit bus fleet too. There's an emergency outage there. So yeah, everything's kind of still on the table for us at this point, just early stages.
Very cool. Emily asked another question about the dash buses. What is the daily en route versus charging schedule? Do the buses have to charge midday? And if so, how does that impact the ability to service the public ridership?
Yeah, so we don't have any on-route chargers yet in the dash fleet. And the bus fleet that we currently have, they do come back and charge midday for an hour or two. And that hasn't had any impact to the current scheduling, just with the portion of vehicles that are electric in the fleet. So yeah, so we have about 100 buses in the fleet. So, it's about 15%. But, there are certainly considerations for as more battery electric buses are introduced into the fleet. What on route charging are we going to need, and are we going to have to redesign service to meet the need? Hopefully, with the routes that we have, we can be able to accomplish it with longer range buses that are coming out, and just and being able to provide some of those midday charges. So Dash is almost a 24/7 service, but with the kind of the runs and the blocks that we have set up, we still have a little bit of a ways to go before there needs to be any kind of more serious schedule changes or adjustments based on the range of the battery electric buses.
Cool. Very cool. Trey asks, are there any take-home vehicles used by first responders or elsewhere in the fleet?
And we do have a couple. And so that's something that, we're going to have to figure out, is if we, provide a mechanism to install chargers for folks that have those take-home vehicles at their homes, or if that's a change in policy where those are no longer take-home vehicles. So, that's just again, still kind of one of the conversations we have to have for those vehicles.
Hey, wait, sorry to jump in. I know this is Amy's webinar, but
No, please.
We have a pilot program right now for 4 take-home police vehicles where we are working with the employees to install charging at their home. So I think in 6 months or a year, maybe we can have a webinar on that take-home piece, because we're trying to really crack that nut and would love to share that with other folks once we have that.
Yeah, that's great, Emily. Thank you so much. Yeah, if you're interested in doing a webinar similar to this one, shoot me an email. I have your email, so I can always shoot you one as well, just from registering for this webinar. So we have a few more questions here. I appreciate everyone being so engaged. It's awesome. Question from Andy. Have you done or seen any studies on the return on investment timeline of installing the EVSE infrastructure as it compares to paying for fossil fuel and the maintenance involved of ICE vehicles?
Yeah, so the total cost of ownership is a part of our fleet transition study, and I think that's pretty common for other similar studies. So it looks at kind of the overall operational costs, incorporating the fueling infrastructure and the ideally lower cost of electrical infrastructure, so electricity. And so obviously that's going to be really site dependent, region, and regionally dependent. Our electricity in Virginia is a lot cheaper than in California. So I'm sure there are studies out there. If anyone on the call has any good ones that they know of, feel free to share them. But it's always going to be kind of site specific.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Another question here about the police vehicles. Are the police vehicles typically doing 3 shifts around the clock?
Yeah, I know Daryl provided an answer too. So yeah, no, they do 2 12-hour shifts.
Okay. Thanks for jumping in there, Daryl. Now, I have a question. So I know that you are the electric vehicle planner but at Virginia Clean Cities, we're obviously fuel agnostic. Are there any vehicles that you guys are planning to not make an EV, or use some other form of like low or no emission vehicles like hydrogen or propane or renewable diesel?
Yeah, hydrogen would definitely kind of be included in anything zero emission that we're including. So our goal that we have in our environmental action plan is for the fleet to be 100% electric. So I would consider battery or hydrogen. So
Okay.
something in the interim. We don't have any liquid other liquid fuels currently, other gaseous fuels. Sorry. So this study really just focused on kind of going, straight to all electric, because that's our end goal.
No, that's
That's our
great.
environmental action plan.
That's a great goal to have. And I was actually just talking with a coworker of mine about how it makes so much sense that a city like Alexandria would go electric, especially for buses and everything else. Another question here from Bruce, our own Bruce. What has been a pleasant present? Okay, I'm fumbling over my words here. What has been a pleasant surprise of fleet electrification?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, people do like the vehicles. They're quiet. They have, a great pickup, and they're more efficient. So the vehicles are, yeah, nice to drive, nice to have. Everyone just wishes we had some more chargers, which I do too.
Of course, who doesn't?
And something we also have some bucket trucks that have the electric bucket on them. And so folks like that, because we've gotten some, from what I heard from the operators, some like noise complaints of the buckets operating in the middle of the night. They're really loud. So, having reduced noise pollution and kind of providing those direct air quality benefits are also super critical, in addition to the, the carbon reduction.
That's very cool. Yeah. Alexandria is going to have some of the cleanest air in all the state before too long.
I hope so.
Any other questions here? David asked, what is the mix currently of DCFC and L2s?
Yeah, we only have level 2 chargers right now for our municipal fleet. That we just have light duty vehicles, but once we start transitioning our emergency response vehicles and heavy duty vehicles, we will be using DC fast chargers for those.
Cool. Aaron asks, have you defined any special training needs for operators as the fleet transition is occurring?
So far, we've done some training videos on how to charge the vehicles, and we've done some ride and drives. And I might ask if Daryl wants to jump in on this one. You're welcome to. But we've done some ride and drives for our city staff as well, just to get folks more familiar with how the vehicles operate, and just as we transition, more and more folks are going to be operating electric vehicles as a part of their normal job. So people have really liked to be able to come out, ask questions, check them out, jump in, drive around a little bit. So those are kind of the trainings that we've done so far. But I expect there probably would be some other maintenance training that we do in the future.
Yeah, I was curious. We do a little bit of work with workforce development on EVSE and EV trainings. Does the city have any plan for those, or for the technicians, like in-house technicians?
Yeah, so currently we've been kind of relying on the equipment warranties and things like that for the operations. But yeah, as we go further down our transition, those training up all the maintenance needs, and we're gonna have to do that.
Is that factored into like some of the data you were sharing earlier?
Yeah, Not in the charts that I showed, but in the total cost of ownership, kind of understanding what maintenance, what annual maintenance, preventative maintenance is going to cost and require. That's a part of the analysis.
Very cool. That's awesome. Another question from Van. Have you done any work on the difference in losses of energy between alternating current and direct current, charging at scale for your fleets?
No, I have not. I don't know enough to say more.
And maybe just give you some clarification. The longer you charge a battery, the more the onboard battery conditioning runs. So if it's hot or cold, it has to heat the battery up or cool it down. So you probably don't notice as much with the smaller batteries. It's still there. So like a Tesla has more losses at like 48 amps than it does at 32 amps. And you'll hear the battery conditioning run on Silverados or on school buses or on the transit buses. The longer you run them, the bigger batteries, then you have more energy to either heat up or cool down the battery while you're charging. And then there's losses on the onboard AC charger because you're going from 480 to 240 or 208, and then on the vehicle back up to 400, 800 volts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was just curious at scale if you'd looked at it in your analysis, that total losses.
No, we haven't looked at that. I don't know if that's going to be part of it, but I will ask. I'll take it back to our contractor.
Yeah, great question, man. Also very interesting. I wish I had gone into electrical engineering. Obviously, it's super interesting stuff. Emily has another question about zoning. Have you had any zoning issues with the meeting of parking minimums while also installing EV chargers that sometimes can impede parking areas? And if so, how have you handled that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. In Alexandria, our basically electric vehicles are allowed under our code as an accessory in any area, and having an EV charger does not. It still counts as a parking space in any of the parking requirements. So in our development conditions, kind of for new developments, we require 5% of spaces to have chargers installed, and then additional percentage of spaces to be make ready. And unless the equipment like protrudes with outside of just, I don't know exactly what the dimensions are, that still counts towards your parking minimums and requirements.
Follow-up question. Does it say specifically in your code, like electric vehicle charging spots count toward parking minimums, or is that just like the way the zoning review group is interpreting it?
Yeah, it does say in our it's in our standard building conditions. I'm happy to share that with you. That it essentially says that EV chargers in a parking space it still counts as a parking space.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could share that with me. I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for going back to that. I also dropped a link from the City of Alexandria's website to the event. Oh, looks like someone else did it. Dave did it at the same time.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, David. I was curious, we were talking about like the zoning and the chargers themselves. I don't know that it would make sense, but are any of the chargers going to be like public facing?
As of right now, that's not something that we're considering, to have our fleet chargers also be public. We have been exploring opportunities for our fleet chargers to be used by employees when they're not being used by fleet vehicles. But right now, yeah, we're not, it's not something we've considered yet.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, most fleet chargers and fleet fueling systems are behind a gate because for the fleet and not. So just curious. Trey asks, could you speak more to the fleet data collection that Alexandria does and what components you/ICF found particularly valuable for your fleet conversion work?
Yeah, so our fleet team, they collect a ton of data on the operation of vehicles that like for maintenance costs, for like the mileage, the location, kind of GPS data, all of that. I don't want to speak too much out of turn of all the data that they collect, but also we're collecting more and more data on the chargers too that we have available. So we can look at things like usage, unique users, the average duration of charging sessions, kind of the energy dispensed, all of that to kind of help inform our planning. And so all of that data was pretty critical for the fleet transition study. I think particularly, we ran into some issues with kind of like looking at daily mileage, because not all of we don't capture kind of daily mileage for all our vehicles. It's more like when they get fueled, the mileage data gets captured. So, it's looking at kind of opportunities to kind of figure out, to collect some of that missing data and, get that into the form that we needed it was helpful. But yeah, basically every piece of data that we collect was critical. Looking at, I think if folks have access to kind of like GPS, those kind of telematics data too, to kind of, that can give some real confirmation to what a normal duty cycle might look like, and helped us also ground truth some of those more edge cases. Like when we had snow emergencies, we could look up kind of data for those specific times and help kind of confirm our assumptions that we were making for some of those operations.
And so it sounds like that data that you're collecting that's your data that you're collecting and that ICF is using to inform its modeling.
Correct. Yeah. Those are all systems that the fleet team have operated for forever to collect the data they need just on normal fleet operations.
I'm curious. Oh shoot, I totally spaced on what I was going to ask you. Oh, telematics system that you, or like software that you use, is that something that you developed in-house, or is there like a telematics provider that you would recommend for some like a fleet transitioner?
I would probably ask Daryl if he wants to speak to the specific software that the fleet team uses. I see. Okay.
Yeah, sure. That's no problem. Thank you. Currently we use CalAmp, and they provide a good service to us. We're getting ready to go a little bit further with them, but yes, we get good results from their product.
Well, thanks, Daryl. I'm also, this is less of like a data question. I noticed in one of your photos that there was like a very unique looking ATV golf cart type of thing. I'm assuming it's electric, and I want to know what it is. Do you know what I'm talking about, Amy?
Yeah, that's the Centro. I think it's the T-Mac is the model. This one.
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, Daryl, I see. You want to explain?
It looks like it's a Gator, only it's not a Gator. It's by Citro. It's fully electric. We have 3 of those in the fleet. The company was an Alexandria-based company from their start. And honestly, I've been out of pocket for the last 3 months, so I can't tell you any more about it than that.
Okay.
I know our parks folks have been using those for like park operations and for some like trash collection in Old Town, just some of those like more narrow side streets and things like that. We're using it for that.
Yeah, that's very cool. Brennan, you have your hand raised. Feel free to come off mute and ask your question.
Thanks, Greg. That Gator is awesome. It can even tow. It looks like there's a towing hitch in the front of it, which is super that is awesome. And Gator is definitely a great name for that beast looking golf cart. Daryl, this is a question going back to telematics. You said it's called CalAmp. How do you spell that?
CalAmp. Sorry, I'm from the deep south, so the southern gets mixed in.
No, I'm in North Carolina. It's okay.
Well, I'm okay. All right, CalAmp, CalAmp. And we've had good success with them in other municipalities I've been involved with. I've used Verizon Network Fleet and a couple other different groups, but we've been pleased with that. And
That's
what you're seeing on the front of that Centron is it's actually a winch. It has a 2-inch hitch on the back, and we do pull some heavy enclosed trailers around the fleet facility with that. So it does tow well.
I'm gonna have to get one of those to take out on the golf course one of these days. Cal Amp, thanks for sharing that. And on this telematics, are you able to see your charging stations and your buses in this telematics software?
Not yet on for the fleet side. Now, the Dash in schools has their own telematic system, so I can't speak to those. But for us, we currently cannot, but I suspect once we get everything completely installed, we will be able to.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks, Daryl. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Brandon, I also put a link to their website, just their generic website for CalAmp.
Thank you. I'll probably need a link to that golf cart too.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
You and me both. I mean, the fact that it's got a winch in the front, it's just that much cooler. That's pretty sweet. Oh, another question from David about e-bikes. Does Alexandria have e-bikes for the city for fleet use, or are they planning any of those?
It's something we've looked into. We don't have any yet, but I do know Arlington has some. So I don't know if Emily wants to jump on and give any of their experience.
Yeah, we have 5. 4 of them are in our motor pool fleet, and then 1 is on the water sewer streets team for them to like just ride around and do inspections. We got them in December of 23, so we're maybe a year and a half into operations. I think they're great in the summer. We found kind of between like November and March, people really didn't want to use them. But they're a great option when we're, especially like Alexandria, we're a fairly small jurisdiction, so you can pretty easily, anyone could anywhere on an electric bike.
Yeah, electric bikes are pretty sweet. I used to commute to our office here in Harrisonburg with one when I lived close enough. Any electric motorcycles for the police?
Not yet, but yeah, we have assumed electric motorcycle replacements for those APD vehicles.
Yeah. A lot of cool things in the electric space for sure. Jordan posted here about some new events. Well, we are nearing the hour. Thank you guys so much for asking all these wonderful questions, thought-provoking questions, and learning about this cool golf cart with a winch on the front of it. Well, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to ask them now.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in, Gregory. Okay. I wanted to give everybody space to ask fleet questions. Alexandria is also doing some awesome stuff in terms of providing public charging or charging at multifamily housing. I don't know if you've got just a couple minutes you could talk about the Plug-in Alexandria project, or I know you'd put out an RFP for provision of public charging maybe a year or so ago, and I don't know if you've got any progress to report on that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, you're right. On the public charging side, we issued a franchise solicitation to find a vendor that would install public chargers on our city property at no cost to the city. So that would create some opportunities for potential revenue share and just, allow us to preserve our capital infrastructure budget for other projects like supporting multifamily dwellings and install chargers. So, but with the franchise, we're currently negotiating with a vendor. So we're hopeful to have that go to city council before their summer break. So yeah, we definitely know that our planning has showed that we're in a deficit for public chargers in Alexandria. So, we're taking it as a responsibility of the city to use some of our property to fill that gap in hopes that kind of more members of the private sector can find opportunities to install chargers, use that as kind of a separate revenue stream. But, we want to use our property to kind of fill that gap in the meantime. And then, yeah, we launched a new program at the end of last week called Plug in Alexandria. We borrowed extremely heavily from Fairfax County's Charge Up Fairfax program. So they have something very similar. And, we thought it was a really great example of how we could provide some direct technical and financial support to multifamily dwellings to help them install EV chargers. So, yeah, that program is open to condos, apartments, to basically apply to get a technical assessment from one of our engineering consultants, but really tell them, what would it take to install your initial chargers for your residents and guests? What would the cost be? Do you need any electrical infrastructure upgrades? Kind of what does that scale and scope look like? And then if those properties end up installing EV chargers, they would be eligible for a reimbursement grant of 30% of the cost, up to $10,000 or $15,000 if they're in a low-income community census tract.
And is that the funding for Plug in Alexandria, is that city funds? Or are you leveraging outside funds for that?
Yes, those are city funds for the incentive and for the technical assistance. So, and we're partnering with the Virginia Clean Cities on the incentive for that. And I see Dave Castile from Blue Whale EV, who they're providing the technical assessments for that project as well. So got the whole family here.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in. This concludes the Virginia Clean Cities Technology Happy Hour. If you'd like to know more about the EV transition planning, Amy's information is below. If you'd like to know more about Virginia Clean Cities, our website is vacleancities.org, and there's a link below in the video description, and my email as well, Gregory Brennan, gbrennan@vacleancities.org. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.